You are listening to HOA Backfired. The HOA tried to weaponize winter. Your snow pile is the problem, and you are moving it. Teresa screamed that I ignored notices, and the next step was towing and a lien threat. She stood in my driveway waving a clipboard, her breath fogging in the freezing air, her white puffer coat dusted with fresh flakes. I had just pulled in after a 12-hour warehouse shift, my eyes burning from fatigue, and she was already blocking my path to the front door. I live in Boulder, Colorado, in a development called the Preserve at Frostwood Snow Route Association, where the board calls everything a winter emergency hazard. I work nights as a warehouse night shift lead, which means I need daytime sleep protected, and Teresa Carter, the communications director, has decided that my existence is a code violation. She carries a laminated policy sheet everywhere, refuses to hand it over, and repeats the same line like a broken robot. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. She said it twice in the first 30 seconds, her voice sharp enough to crack ice. The violation notice in her hand accused me of blocking the snow route with a pile that the city plow left at the end of my driveway. I did not put it there. The plow did. But Teresa did not care. She jabbed a gloved finger at the berm and told me I had 24 hours to move it or face a $500 fine, and if I did not comply after that, they would tow my car and file a lien. I asked her how I was supposed to move a 6-foot-high wall of compacted ice and slush without heavy equipment. She smiled. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. I stared at her, too tired to argue, and she took my silence as surrender. She turned and walked back toward the street, calling over her shoulder that the next notice would come with a tow authorization. I watched her climb into her white SUV and drive off, leaving me standing in the cold with a headache and a problem I did not create. I moved here 6 months ago because the rent was reasonable and the commute to the warehouse was short. I did not know the HOA was run by people who treated snow like a criminal offense. The board had sent 3 notices in the past 2 weeks, each one more aggressive than the last, and I had responded to every single one with photos proving compliance. I shoveled my walk within 12 hours of every storm. I salted my steps. I kept my driveway clear. But Teresa kept finding new violations, and the fines kept piling up. The problem was not the snow. The problem was that Teresa controlled the email blasts and the meeting agendas, and she was using both to target me. She claimed I was a safety hazard, a liability, a threat to property values. She sent emails to the entire neighborhood with my address highlighted, calling me out by name. Neighbors I had never spoken to started giving me dirty looks at the mailboxes. One guy told me I was making the whole street look bad. I tried to explain that I was following every rule, but nobody listened. Teresa had already poisoned the well. The stakes were simple. I was trying to keep my neighborhood reputation clean, and the HOA was smearing me. I could not afford to lose this fight. I needed sleep, I needed peace, and I needed Teresa to leave me alone. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of a diesel engine idling in my driveway. I stumbled to the window and saw a pickup truck with a plow attachment parked 10 feet from my garage. A guy in coveralls was shoveling the berm that Teresa had threatened me over. I threw on my coat and ran outside, my heart pounding. The guy looked up and told me the HOA hired him to clear the violation. I asked him who authorized it. He shrugged and said Teresa called him that morning. I told him to stop. He ignored me and kept shoveling. I pulled out my phone and started recording. He finally stopped and wiped his forehead, annoyed. He said he was just doing his job, and if I had a problem I could take it up with the board. I asked him if he had a work order. He did not. He said Teresa told him it was an emergency and that I refused to comply. I showed him the photos on my phone, proving I had already cleared everything. He squinted at the screen, confused, then shrugged again and said he was not paid to argue. He climbed back in his truck and left. I stood in the driveway, shaking with anger. Teresa had sent a vendor to my property without permission, under the excuse of safety, and the vendor had no paperwork. I went inside and pulled up the HOA portal on my laptop. The violation entry for my address had been updated that morning. The original date was gone. The new date made it look like the violation had been filed 3 days earlier, which would have justified the emergency response. But I had screenshots of the original entry, and the dates did not match. I stared at the screen and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. Teresa was editing records after the fact to cover her tracks. The HOA portal showed the violation entry was edited after I disputed it, and I had proof. I saved the new screenshots and added them to the folder I had been building since the first notice. I had certified mail receipts for every response I sent, photos time-stamped for every storm, and now I had evidence of record tampering. I was holding a trump card, but I was not going to reveal it yet. I needed to wait for the right moment. That moment came faster than I expected. The next day, Teresa showed up at my door with a surprise sidewalk measuring stunt. She had a ruler, a clipboard, and a witness. A board member named Greg who pretended to be neutral but was clearly on her side. Teresa knelt on my front walk and measured the gap between the edge of the cleared path and the property line. She announced that I was 3 inches short of the required width and wrote it down on her clipboard. Greg nodded like a bobblehead. I asked them both if they were serious. Teresa stood up and brushed snow off her knees. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. I told Teresa that the city code required a minimum of 36 inches, and my path was 42. She said the HOA required 48. I asked her to show me the rule. She held up the laminated sheet and tilted it away so I could not read it. She said it was all there in black and white, and if I had bothered to attend meetings, I would know. Greg nodded again. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of them both standing on my property without permission, measuring my sidewalk like it was a crime scene. Teresa told me to put the phone away. I kept filming. She turned and walked back to her car, calling over her shoulder that the fine was now $750. I went inside and called my mail carrier, a guy named Dennis, who had been delivering on this route for 10 years. Dennis was the closest thing I had to an ally. He had seen Teresa posting notices on my door repeatedly, even after I responded, and he told me once that she did the same thing to other people before they moved out. I asked him if he would be willing to testify at a hearing. He said yes, but only if it did not cost him his job. I told him I would keep his name out of it until the last possible moment. That night, I got an email from Teresa. The subject line was "Emergency Meeting Required." The body of the email said the board was calling a special session to address my ongoing violations and that I was required to attend or face additional fines. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening at 6, which was right in the middle of my sleep window. I had to work that night, and I had to travel out of town the next weekend for a family obligation. I could not afford to get dragged into this mess, but I also could not afford to skip the meeting. I showed up to the meeting with my binder and my folder of evidence. The room was a narrow conference space in the clubhouse with folding chairs and a long table where Teresa and 2 other board members sat like judges. Greg was there, along with a woman named Linda who handled finances. Teresa smiled when I walked in. She said she was glad I could make it and that this would not take long. She opened a folder and pulled out a stack of photos. She said they were proof that I had failed to maintain my property and that the violations were escalating. The photos showed my driveway covered in snow. The timestamps were from 3 days earlier during a storm. I told Teresa that the storm had not ended until 6 in the morning and that I had 12 hours to clear it under city code. She said the HOA code required immediate action. I asked her to cite the section. She flipped through her laminated sheet and pointed to a paragraph. I leaned forward to read it. The text said property owners must clear walkways within a reasonable time after snowfall. I asked her what reasonable meant. She said it meant whatever the board decided. I opened my binder and pulled out my own photos, time-stamped 2 hours after the storm ended, showing my driveway and walk completely clear. I laid them on the table. Teresa glanced at them and said my photos were old because the snow depth changed overnight. I told her the timestamps were embedded in the metadata and I could pull up the raw files if she wanted proof. She waved a hand and said the board did not have time for technical arguments. Greg and Linda nodded. Teresa moved on to the next violation. She said I had parked a space heater in my garage and that it was a fire code issue. I told her the heater was electric, portable, and rated for indoor use. She said the HOA did not allow any heating devices in garages. I asked her to show me the rule. She said it was implied under the fire safety section. I told her that was not how rules worked. She smiled. We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. That line hit me like a punch. I realized Teresa was not interested in rules or safety. She was interested in control. She wanted me gone, and she was willing to lie, manipulate records, and harass me until I gave up. I looked at Greg and Linda. Neither of them met my eyes. They were letting Teresa run the show, and they were fine with it. I took a breath and decided to hold my cards a little longer. I told Teresa I would remove the heater and that I expected the fines to be dropped once I provided proof of compliance. She said the fines were already assessed and non-refundable. I asked her how that was legal. She said the bylaws gave the board discretion to impose penalties without appeal. I told her I would be filing a complaint with the management company. She laughed. The management company works for us, not you. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA horror stories where paper trails destroy power trips. I left the meeting with my stomach in knots. Teresa had made it clear that she was untouchable and the board was backing her. I drove home and sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the snow piling up on the windshield. I thought about moving. I thought about paying the fines and keeping my head down. But then I thought about Dennis and the certified mail receipts and the screenshots of the edited portal entries. I thought about the photos Teresa used and the way she claimed they were recent when the storm had ended days earlier. I thought about the vendor she sent to my property without authorization, and I realized I had everything I needed to bury her. The next morning, I went to the gas station to refill my propane tank for the space heater. Teresa followed me. I saw her white SUV pull into the lot behind me and park 2 spaces over. She got out with her phone, filming me as I filled the tank. I ignored her and finished the transaction. She walked closer, still filming, and asked me if I was aware that transporting propane in a personal vehicle was a hazard. I told her it was legal as long as the tank was secured. She said the HOA had a policy against hazardous materials. I asked her to cite it. She did not answer. She just kept filming. I pulled out my own phone and started filming her. I asked her why she was harassing me. She said she was documenting a violation. I asked her what violation. She said transporting hazardous materials. I told her propane was not hazardous under federal or state law. She said the HOA had stricter standards. I asked her to show me the policy. She said it was in the handbook. I told her to email me the page number. She said I could look it up myself. I checked the timestamp on my phone. It was 10:15 in the morning. I asked Teresa what time she claimed I filled the tank. She said just now. I told her the gas station receipt would show the exact time, and if she was going to keep filming me, she should make sure her story held up. She lowered her phone. I smiled. I had trapped her in her own timeline. If she tried to claim I did something illegal, the receipt would prove I followed every rule. If she tried to edit her story later, I had her on video contradicting herself. Teresa got back in her SUV and left. I finished loading the tank and drove home. I felt a small surge of victory, but I knew it was not over. Teresa was going to escalate again, and I needed to be ready. 2 days later, the escalation came. I woke up to find a plow berm blocking my driveway again, but this time it was deliberate. The city plow had already gone through hours earlier, and the berm was clean. Someone had dumped fresh snow across my driveway entrance, packing it down with a shovel. I went outside and saw tire tracks leading away from the pile. I followed them to the street and saw Teresa's white SUV parked 3 houses down. I pulled out my phone and called Dennis. He was finishing his route and said he would swing by in 10 minutes. I waited in the cold, watching Teresa's SUV. She did not move. When Dennis arrived, I showed him the berm and the tire tracks. He took photos with his own phone and told me he had seen Teresa's truck parked on the street earlier that morning, right around the time the plow would have finished. He said he could not prove she dumped the snow, but the timing was suspicious. I thanked him and told him I would keep his name out of it for now. I spent the next hour clearing the berm with a shovel. My arms ached and my back screamed, but I got it done. I took photos of the cleared driveway and emailed them to Teresa with a timestamp. I also attached the photos Dennis took of the tire tracks and asked her if she knew anything about the obstruction. She did not reply. That afternoon, I got another email. This one was from the HOA management company, a generic corporate firm that handled multiple developments. The email said the board had requested a lien filing due to unpaid fines totaling $2,400. I stared at the number. I had not paid any of the fines because I was disputing them, but I did not realize they had compounded this fast. The email said I had 10 days to pay or the lien would be recorded with the county. I called the management company and asked to speak to someone who could explain the charges. I was transferred 3 times and finally got a woman named Paula who sounded exhausted. I asked her how the fines had reached $2,400. She said the board had assessed penalties for multiple violations, including failure to clear snow, unauthorized heating devices, obstruction of snow routes, and failure to attend mandatory meetings. I told her I had attended the meeting. She said the minutes showed I was absent. I told her that was a lie. She sighed and said she could only report what the board submitted. I asked Paula if the board was allowed to manipulate meeting minutes. She paused. She said the management company relied on the board to provide accurate records, and if I believed the minutes were incorrect, I could file a formal dispute. I asked her how long that would take. She said 30 to 60 days. I told her I had 10 days before the lien was filed. She said there was nothing she could do to stop the process unless the board withdrew the request. I hung up and opened my laptop. I pulled up the HOA portal and found the meeting minutes from the emergency session. The entry listed the attendees as Teresa, Greg, Linda, and 3 homeowners I had never heard of. My name was not on the list. I pulled up my calendar and checked the date. The meeting had happened. I had been there. The minutes were fake. I took screenshots and added them to my folder. I now had proof that Teresa was manipulating meeting minutes to erase objections, proof that the violation entries were backdated, proof that she sent a vendor to my property without authorization, and proof that she had followed me to the gas station to fill me over a made-up rule. I had certified mail receipts showing I responded to every notice, and I had Dennis as a witness who could confirm Teresa's harassment. I was holding a trump card, and I was ready to deploy it. The showdown happened at the frozen neighborhood gate keypad with a line of cars behind. Teresa had called another emergency meeting, this time at the main entrance to the development, claiming there was a snow route obstruction that required immediate board action. I showed up and found her standing beside the keypad with Greg and Linda, all 3 of them blocking the entrance lane. A line of cars was backed up behind them, honking. Snow was falling hard, and the visibility was terrible. Teresa saw me and pointed. She said I was the obstruction. She claimed my car was parked illegally on the snow route and that it needed to be towed immediately. I told her my car was in my driveway, not on the street. She said the board had received a complaint. I asked her who complained. She said it was anonymous. I told her that was not how violations worked. She pulled out a tow authorization slip and waved it in my face. We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. I opened my binder and pulled out the folder. I told Teresa I had proof that she had been manipulating records, editing portal entries, and lying in meeting minutes. I told her I had certified mail receipts proving I responded to every notice and that she fined me anyway. I told her I had photos proving compliance, witness testimony proving harassment, and a timeline proving she sent a vendor to my property without authorization. I told her I was going to email all of it to every homeowner in the development, right now, and that she could either drop the fines and retract her claims in writing, or she could explain to the entire neighborhood why she was running a scam. Teresa's face went red. She opened her mouth to argue, but I pulled out my phone and held it up. I told her I had already drafted the email and it was ready to send. All I had to do was hit the button. I told her she had 30 seconds to decide. Greg and Linda stepped back. They looked at each other, then at Teresa. Linda said maybe they should review the records. Greg said maybe they should table the tow. Teresa stared at me, her jaw clenched. She was holding the tow authorization slip in one hand and the laminated policy sheet in the other. Her breath was fogging in the cold, and her hands were shaking. I hit send. The email went out to 243 homeowners. I watched Teresa's phone buzz in her pocket. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. Her face went pale. She lowered the tow slip and turned to Greg and Linda. She told them the meeting was over. She got in her SUV and drove off, leaving Greg and Linda standing in the snow looking confused. The fallout was immediate. Within an hour, I got replies from 12 homeowners thanking me for exposing the scam. 3 of them said Teresa had done the same thing to them, and they had paid the fines because they did not know how to fight back. One guy said he had been planning to move because of the harassment. Another said she had filed a complaint with the county, but nothing had happened. The replies kept coming, and by the end of the night, the board was flooded with demands for Teresa's resignation. 2 days later, the management company called an audit. Paula, the woman I had spoken to earlier, emailed me to say that the board had requested a review of all fines and violations from the past year. She said the audit would take 2 weeks, and any fines found to be improperly assessed would be refunded. She also said Teresa had been asked to step down from the communications role pending the investigation. The audit results came back 3 weeks later. The report found that Teresa had manipulated meeting minutes in 14 cases, backdated violation entries in 9 cases, and assessed fines without proper notice in 22 cases. The total amount of improper fines was over $18,000. The management company issued refunds to every affected homeowner, and Teresa was forced to retract her claims in writing. The letter went out to the entire neighborhood, and it included an apology and a statement that she would no longer be involved in enforcement actions. But the karma beat came later. During the audit, the management company discovered that Teresa's favorite fee, a $50 administrative charge she had been tacking onto every violation, did not exist in the bylaws. She had invented it. The ledger showed she had collected over $3,000 in fake fees over the past 2 years, and the money had gone into a discretionary account that only she and the board president controlled. The management company froze the account and launched a separate investigation. Teresa resigned from the board entirely, and the HOA dropped the case to avoid a public records mess. The vendor blacklist came as a side consequence. The contractor Teresa hired to dig up my driveway without authorization filed a complaint with the local trade association after the HOA refused to pay his invoice. He claimed Teresa had promised the board would cover the cost, but the board said they never authorized the work. The dispute went public, and other contractors in the area started refusing to bid on HOA projects. When the next storm hit 2 weeks later, the board had to scramble for contractors during the next storm, and they ended up paying triple rates for emergency snow removal. I kept my head down after that. The neighborhood calmed down, the fines disappeared, and Teresa moved out 6 months later. Dennis told me she sold her house and relocated to a different part of the state. I never saw her again. The board replaced her with a retired accountant named Tom, who ran meetings like a bureaucrat and never tried to invent rules. The HOA became boring, which was exactly what I wanted. I still work nights, I still need daytime sleep, and I still keep a folder of certified mail receipts and screenshots, just in case. Because in a place like the preserve at Frostwood Snow Route Association, you never know when the next Teresa will show up with a laminated sheet and a ruler, ready to measure your life 3 inches at a time. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you listening.